This is the story of Frank Dawson Cobbett, starting when he was a little baby. Frank is in the foreground, lying on this yellow cushion with his cousin Jennifer. Jennifer Byers was just about the same age as Frank. We used to spend a lot of time together with the Byers. This particular film looks like it was taken in Almont, Ontario, where grandmother Lois and grandfather Edward Winslow Spragg had a home. This is Ann Byers on the left in the purple, and Ruth Cobbett on the right, holding up little Frank. We spent a lot of time at the Byers home on Bostwick Island in Gananoque. There you see Gordie Byers, David Cobbett, and Diney Cobbett. And look who else shows up, little Frank, hanging probably from a tree. Also in Gananoque, David on the right. I believe that's Gordie in the foreground with the blonde hair. Other time in the summers we spent in Como, in Hudson, outside of Montreal. And what you're seeing is little Tyler in his punt, and Frank taking good care of him, making sure he stays safe and has a good time. Here you see Diney on the right, Frank and Ty. And this is again in the Lake of Two Mountains. All the way through these movies, you'll see what a good big brother Frank was. All aboard. This is Diney and her friend Cindy King, Granddad, Frank with the snorkel and mask on, and Ty doing his best job to use the oars. Oh, now you get to see Dave. This was when Dave was probably 18 or 19 years old. He was still recovering from his broken neck injury. Frankie, he's calling. There's Diney. This is a camping trip, I believe, in upstate New York. There he was, a little quick glimpse of Frank. Frank is not in this particular scene, but I thought you would get a kick out of seeing Granddad and frustrated Dave sending some horseshoes to the moon. Okay, a lot of time in the summers we spent in Matisse Beach, Quebec, on the Gaspé Peninsula. We used to spend a lot of time playing in the tide pools, looking for shrimps, and playing with kelp. Good balance. Diney and I had a little stuffed animal that I called Buns. Talking about buns, pretty amazing, really, to be able to hang out as a family on the beach, all different ages, have nice times together. That's the lighthouse at Matisse. There's Granddad. Well, sorry about all the skin being shown. There is Tiny. She looks like she was maybe a bit of a moody teenager at that point, probably around 17. We often went to a swimming hole there, and it was on a river that flowed into Matisse. I think possibly, I don't know what it's called, maybe the Little Matisse River. Um, but yeah, many people that lived there would go on a hot summer day and enjoy themselves together. This is in Como, C-O-M-O, Quebec. Frank wearing his Roslyn School t-shirt. We had friends named the Robinsons, and they had a dairy farm where they invited us to participate in all kinds of fun activities, and we were able to go over there whenever we wanted, hang out in the fields, check out the barns. They rented our family a cottage that had a white picket fence in front of it on Main Road in Como. One of the highlights of the year for little kids was to go to the St. Lazare Fair just outside of Hudson and enjoy the livestock, but also some of the fun rides. You see Diney holding Tyler on the merry-go-round. And you'll also see Frank in this scene. I think he's maybe, can't tell. There's Frank with his little scouting hat on, getting ready to go into the crazy house. Here he comes. Diney was 4 years older than Frank. Okay. Boy, that must have been such a thrill back in the day to go that fast and that out of control. There he is. No. Okay, Murray Park was close to where we lived in Westmount, Montreal, and it had a wonderful hill where we would toboggan and just go sliding. I think this may be one of the Fuller boys, maybe Jamie Fuller, which was a neighbor across the street from us. You can tell that somewhere down there was a sheet of ice. Talking about sheets of ice, here is the Murray Park tennis courts that got converted into ice skating rink during the wintertime. They flooded it. And they had a combination of just free skating like you're seeing here, but they also would in some years put up hockey boards. And I saw some pretty incredible hockey players on our little tennis court flooded. Okay, we're going back to Como, and here's Diney and her friend Cindy and Frank taking care of the animals. And horsing around. All these horses have names, and Jane Robinson, who's still around, remembers all the names of these horses, as does Lorraine Duclos. Pretty amazing that the girls were able to bareback ride those big, strong horses. It's Frank and little Tyler, making sure to avoid cow pies. Dad had a famous comb over. Granddad Frank, that is. Okay, and just across the road from the farm was the lake, and that was just a quick clip of us playing together in the water. But this is one of Frank's early sailing experiences. I'm not sure who the boy with the glasses is. Might be one of the Robinson boys that had the farm next door. You're seeing Oka, Quebec, across the lake with the steeple. Mom and Dad always enjoyed putting a placard with their family name on it in front of the house in Como when they were there, and also the house in Matisse Beach. This is the house that our grandmother rented in Como, and where we spent some very happy times. I believe that is the milk house, that brick structure in the background, where after milking the cattle, we would take the cans of milk out to be put into a larger tank so that it could be picked up by the dairies. Ruh-roh. We spent a little bit of time going down to the Plattsburgh, New York area, and I believe this is one of those trips. Yeah, here we go. And while we were there, we would camp and also go to tourist attractions like the Ausable Chasm. You see Frank, Diney, Grandad. Okay, time's passed, and now we've got a much more graceful young Frank doing his pirouettes. Man, could he skate. It's our cousin Jane Byers. And this is little Tyler. Dressed up in Montreal Canadiens colors, I guess. Montreal Santa Claus Parade, always a big attraction. Go down probably St. Catherine Street in Montreal, past the department stores. On top of Montreal Island, on top of Mount Royal, there is a lake, small lake, called Beaver Lake, Lac au Castor in French. And again, in the winter, they would allow it to freeze, of course, and set it up for some phenomenal skating. Now we're back to Murray Park, and now you're looking at about a, I don't know, maybe 15-year-old Frank. This time he was a hockey player, and you could even see some of his hockey gauntlets that he was wearing there. And I don't know who this little girl is, but she seems to fancy him. Frank and Granny. Okay, now we're back to Gananoque, another summer in Gananoque, Ontario, in the Thousand Islands region. I included some clips of some of the amazing old wooden boats that would go by. This is Jennifer, the same little girl that you saw in the very first opening scene as infants, together with Frank. Now all grown up, and okay, maybe the best scene in this entire collection. On the front lawn in front of the beautiful house, they had Muskoka chairs or Adirondack chairs set up. Here's a very heavy box that Frank and Tyler are carrying to Auntie Anne. You also saw Granny Mum's Winslow Sprague, Lois Winslow Sprague. That was Tyler and my old friend Paul Langman, friend up the street, being supervised by this surfer boy. When Frank was in his teens, the Beach Boys were one of the hottest things, and Frank loved everything about California Beach Boy culture. He had the proper haircut. He loved the music, listened to Little Deuce Coupe and all of the Beach Boys hits. He even had a very early, very functional skateboard that he used to take around Westmount with him. There he is. Okay, we were just shown visiting our friends, the Hofers. They were neighbors again in Westmount. And Johnny Hofer was a great friend of Frank's. And this is Lake St. Louis, a lake to the west of Montreal, as part of the confluence of the Ottawa River and the St. Lawrence River. And here you see Dad, Granddad, that is, Tyler, Diney, and Frank out for a sail, and pretty advanced considering this is probably the early 1960s to be able to get a film of a boat in action. Okay, this is a family trip to Prince Edward Island, and this is the PEI ferry. Everybody dolled up in their fine clothes. Back in the day, people dressed up to go on public transportation, whether it was a ferry or an aircraft. They even dressed up to go to the Montreal Canadiens games. This was long ago before there was even the concept of a bridge being built between New Brunswick and PEI. The only way to get there was by ferry. On that same trip, we went to New Brunswick, and these are the famous flower pots at, also known as the Hopewell Rocks. And we had the greatest time cavorting around them at low tide. You don't see that much of Granny because she was behind the camera most of the time. Amazingly beautiful. There's Granddad dressed up in his jacket and Bermuda shorts. So there are 7 hours of family movies. This is about 30 minutes out of that, but the rest of the film provide really good context for these Frank highlights that we're seeing here. I think this is probably the Bay of Fundy. Did a little bit of serious body surfing. Okay, this is a story that I love. These are the Woodley replicas, and the Woodley replicas were miniature replicas of historic buildings, mostly in England, maybe Scotland, built in a field on Prince Edward Island. And we loved going there, and Frank loved it so much that he actually entered into a contract to purchase the Woodley replicas. The contract was never executed, but he came very close to owning the Woodley replicas, and he had plans with a partner of his to improve the experience for visitors. Okay, time passes. This is a famous, I believe, annual football game. You can see a Canadian flag and a US flag between the Westmount High School team and the Potsdam team from Potsdam, New York, I believe. You see the US flag there. Frank is number 51, offensive lineman. You can see a forearm shiver pad in him from the back there. Large part of his identity was his participation on the football team. Coincidentally, another farming family, also known as the Robinsons, had a dairy farm in Granby, Quebec, in the eastern townships. And we would often go down there in the spring, late winter, early spring, to help collecting sap to make maple syrup. I think this may be Rudy, the dog. It was a beautiful border collie, maybe regular collie. And that was old Reg Robinson right there. It was so fun to use the different farm equipment that they had there. But these big workhorses would tow heavy tanks through the woods, and we would take the sap from pails hung off the side of the trees and put them into that big tank, and then it would be boiled down. Well, talking about cool things, there was Granny smoking a cigarette and being cool like a movie star, and there's Frank driving the Boston Whaler with an 18 horsepower Johnson outboard. That's where he learned to drive a boat, I would imagine. Okay, this is back at 560 Lansdowne Avenue in Westmount, and this must be Christmas or some other special occasion because Frank and Linda Finney, who became Linda Cobbett, and Dave are all arriving dressed up. Yeah, this must be Christmas because there are other people walking around dolled up as well. Obviously had a white Christmas. Okay. Right out of high school, Frank got a job as a teller at the Bank of Montreal in NDG, Notre Dame de Grace neighborhood of Montreal. And his chosen method of transportation was this beautiful, I think it was a Yamaha. We're coming to the close. But what a great way to end. Driving off to work in his business suit. See you, Frank.